A whole 6 teams are on bye this week, right before the fantasy playoffs, and we still have to put together quality lineups. These are the running backs you must start and sit this week. Now let's discuss James Cook to begin this. Was last week a fluke, or is it a sign of things to come? Because in that game last week, Cook saw a season-high 46% of the snaps, 20 total touches, including 6 receptions, and over 100 yards. Now these 20 touches were more than Devin Singletary, and he was used in more key situations around the red zone and passing downs compared to the veteran Singletary. And this game was close. I mean, here's the box score. As you can see, it was 17-7 heading into the fourth quarter against the Patriots on Thursday night. So it's not like this was a blowout and why he saw more snaps. Because earlier in the season, he was mainly seeing his increased snaps in blowouts. He only played over 15% of the snaps once until the week 7 bye. And typically after the bye week, rookies and other key players will start to see more usage. They'll be put into the game plan more. And this is exactly what we've seen. After that week 7 bye, every single week he's played over 15% of the snaps, going over 20% often, and now this past week in week 13, a season high 46% of the snaps. Slowly but surely, this rookie breakout has been happening for Cook. And literally everything's hit a season high last week, from the yardage to the touches to the usage, and now he's a 10-point favorite this week. Cook faces the Jets, who do indeed have a good run defense, but we know that Cook is a solid pass catcher and is a 10-point favorite. That normally means you're going to see more usage and be in the red zone a good amount. And oh yeah, the rookie, reminder, the rookie, second-round rookie, is top 5 amongst all the running backs in yards per touch. So basically, when he gets the ball, he produces, and now he's getting the ball more. So simply put, if you have not already noticed, you should be starting him this week. Okay, now let's discuss the curious case of Dameon Pierce, who, look, it's been rough for this guy lately. He hasn't topped 14 points since week 7. Now, the formula for Pierce to have success is pretty simple. If the game stays close, he sees more work, and he's really good with the ball in his hands. But lately, the games haven't been staying close. I mean, they lose by 13 to the Commanders. He only sees 10 touches. The following week against the Dolphins, they get absolutely blown out. They lose by 15. He only sees 5 carries. But this past week against the Browns, in the first half specifically, the game was close, and this led to a lot more touches for Pierce and a decent day, around 12 fantasy points. Because this Texans team, they're not great. They're led by Kyle Allen. They just want to run the ball, get out of there, keep the clock going, and Pierce, when he has the ball, is solid. He is top 5 in broken tackles this year, but reminder, he really didn't take on the running back 1 job from Rex Burkhead until about week 3. Since then, he's number 2, only behind Josh Jacobs in broken tackles as a rookie. He is a legit baller, similar to Josh Jacobs in terms of how he picks up yardage. He's even earning targets now, but there's a big problem. And that big problem is real big. It's the fact that he's a 16.5-point underdog this week against the Cowboys. The biggest underdog, the biggest running back underdog on the entire season is Dameon Pierce this week. And sure, the Cowboys, they don't have a great run defense. They're bottom 10 against run. So that does help Pierce, but he's a 17-point underdog. If he's not getting there in the first couple of drives, odds are, especially in the second half, he's not going to be seeing many touches. Now, for reference, in 3 games as a 10-plus point underdog, that's how bad this team is. They've played in 3 games already. This will be their 4th. He's only averaging 9 fantasy points per game when he's that big of an underdog. And now he's a 17-point underdog, basically, not 10. Now you might be saying, but he has 15 targets over the last 4 weeks, so he sort of has some outs to his game. Well, not necessarily. Like, don't get me wrong, the targets are good, but he's not doing anything with them. If he's just catching it for 1 or 2 yards, it's not adding up all that much, because he is basically the worst starting running back in the league with the ball in his hands. Yards per out run, yards per reception amongst running backs, that's not that great. He's not doing anything after the catch. And this is what we kind of knew when he was coming out of college in Florida. He's not much of a pass catcher. This week, as a huge underdog, we got to sit him. Okay, now let's break down Jamal Williams this week. Williams, look, I love this dude, really. Who doesn't? 14 touchdowns this year, and here's a key stat. 11 of them are from 1 yard out. The touchdowns and the reliability there is fantastic, or at least it has been, but now I have some concerns. And what you're seeing right here is from PFF. This is their last week's game. This is the goal line touches. There was 4 overall snaps in this game between Williams and Swift, and it was split 50-50 for the first time this year. So Williams, he's been dynamite because of his touchdown upside, lost a lot of usage this past week in that category. And in general, Swift just saw his most snaps, 51% since week 1, which led to Williams seeing a season low 23 snaps, less than 30% of the total snaps. Okay, so where are the outs from Williams' game if he's not scoring as many touchdowns, because Swift is now seeing more usage? Well, he has 0 targets in the last 5 games, so the receiving game usage, that's not there. And he's not all that efficient with the ball in his hands. 49th in true yards per carry, 47th in yards per touch when you factor in his receptions. So what you have here is an inefficient running back who has no real passing game usage. We have seen 0 the last 5 games, and and now he's losing snaps and touchdown upside. And the issue is when he's not scoring 2 touchdowns, he's not that useful. He scores no touchdowns in week 9, just 10 points. 1 touchdown, barely gets there at 12 points. 1 touchdown in each of the last 2 games, barely getting to 10 and 9 points. And I'm not even sure we could rely on him for 1 touchdown now, given the fact that Swift's role has increased to his most usage since week 1. He finally looks healthy. We're sitting Williams. So we go from a veteran to a rookie running back, a 7th round rookie running back, and this dude's story is fantastic. The 7th round rookie got into camp, started getting hyped, beat out a veteran in Ronald Jones, and now he's playing meaningful snaps right next to Patrick Mahomes. And now in 2 games without Ronald Jones, as you can see on the right side of the screen right here, he's averaging 16 fantasy points, 18 rush attempts, a catch and a half, so basically 20 touches and 16 points these past 2 games. I mean, that's RB1 usage. Now the rookie Pacheco is still splitting snaps, seeing about 46% last week. He's splitting with the veteran Jerick McKinnon. But this offense is so good that if you're playing 50% of the snaps and you're talented, you can pay off. He had over 80 yards, 16 fantasy points last week. He now has 4 straight games of 80 plus yards. A reminder, he is a rookie. And as we discussed with James Cook as a rookie after the bye week, similar things are happening, surprise, surprise, with Pacheco after the week 8 bye. Over his last 4 games, he's averaging nearly 13 fantasy points per game and over 17 total touches per game. This is what we call the rookie breakout. And now this week, he comes into a game as a 10-point favorite versus a struggling Denver Broncos team. I could see the rookie easily seeing 20 plus touches. We need to start him. But what do we do with Travis Etienne, who's been concerning owners lately? Over these last 3 games, week 10, then he goes on a bye, week 12 and week 13, he has not topped 10 fantasy points, and it's starting to worry some people. Okay, let's discuss this story. Let's break it down here. In week 10, they get blown out by Kansas City. He only puts up about 10 points. In week 11, he goes on bye, and then week 12, he only sees 2 touches before getting injured. But he's returning in week 13 and facing a bad Lions team. He's going to produce, right? Wrong. He finishes as the running back 38 this past week, scoring just 7.6 fantasy points. So now it's almost been 6 weeks since he's produced for his fantasy owners. All of that is bad news, but I do have some good news for you. Coming off of the injury, he went out there and he played 88% of the snaps. He was the clear RB1. There was no JaMychal Hasty being involved. There was no rookie Snoop Connor being involved. Now this tells us that he's healthy and he's getting right back to his full workhorse role that he was seeing 20 plus points in close games before the injury and the blowouts. And now this week he does have a tough matchup against the Titans, their number 3 run defense, but he is only a 3-point underdog, seeing about 90% of the snaps, so he should still be out there for 16 to 20 touches. And that's important because on a per touch basis, he ranks 6th in the NFL right now, averaging nearly 6 yards per touch, 5.8 to be exact. 6 teams are on bye. This dude is electric, and you're not going to see many situations where a guy is seeing 90% of the snaps this week specifically, so yeah, you're starting Etienne. But are we starting either or both of the Tampa Bay running backs and the rookie Rachaad White and Fournette? Let's start with Fournette, who returned this past week on Monday night. Fournette came back and he was the clear leader in snaps, playing 15 more snaps than Rachaad White, his 48 to White's 33. But this is a little bit skewed because Fournette played 24 of the 32-minute drill snaps, especially late in the game when the Bucs were making their comeback, scoring 2 touchdowns in the final 5 minutes. Before that happened, the snaps were basically 50-50. Fournette had 10 carries, 9 for Rachaad White. Rachaad White had 8 targets, 6 for Leonard Fournette. This was a 50-50 backfield, basically. And now the Tampa Bay Buccaneers very quietly have the 2nd worst team total on the week. They're projected to score just 16.75 points, less than the Jets, Ravens, Broncos, Jags. Only the Texans have a worse team total. That's how bad this offense has become. And part of this is due to the fact that their matchup is not a good one. The San Francisco 49ers rank 4th right now in run defense. They give up the least points to the running back position. Not only do they give up the least points to the running back position, they give up over 100 less rushing yards on the year than any other team. This is a rough matchup for the veteran Fournette and the rookie White. Simply put, I'm sitting both of these dudes who are projected for less than 10 points each in the fantasy cheat sheet, which you can check out down below if you want it. So we discussed Fournette, who's a veteran. Now let's talk about Latavius Murray, who, man, this dude's first game, his first big game as a Raider his rookie year. I remember watching it at college. I believe it was a Thursday night game. He had just 4 carries. Again, a rookie, 4 carries. He puts up 112 yards, 2 touchdowns, one of them being a 90-yard touchdown, and then he ends up leaving with injury. So on 4 carries, he goes off for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns. And when he was drafted, he was one of these Darren McFadden type players, if you remember that name, for just elite athleticism. When these bars are closer to 100, it's fantastic. I mean, anything over 70 is great. He's over that in every category. Elite speed, burst, and agility for Latavius Murray. And this season, he's been fine to good for fantasy owners. In 6 out of his 8 games, he's gone over 10 fantasy points, including starting in both games since Melvin Gordon was cut. Now that's the good news, but there is bad news. For starters, he's 33 years old, and now he lacks that burst and that speed. He's also not efficient, ranking 59th in true yards per carry amongst running backs and 48th in yards per touch. I mean, he's not doing anything on a per touch basis in a poor offense. And even more bad news, Mike Boone is back, and don't laugh, this actually matters. Because Boone came back, and yeah, he only played 12 snaps, but he was immediately the running back 2 over the veteran Marlon Mack. And he's expected to see more usage this week, and that matters because he ranks top 10 in yards per touch amongst running backs this year. He's extremely efficient when, like we said with Latavius Murray, he's not. Basically, Murray was just trusted more than Melvin Gordon, and then Chase Edmonds got hurt, and then there was only Marlon Mack left, and then Mike Boone was hurt, so Latavius Murray just kind of walked into more touches. But Boone was earning more touches before injury, and he's the much more dynamic player. We're not starting Boone yet, but we have to sit Murray here. And we also have to be careful with the Jets running backs. We can start talking about Michael Carter, who did not practice at all last week, so let's just assume he misses this week. That leaves us with Zonovan Knight and Ty Johnson as the main running backs in the Jets backfield. Let's start with Knight. Last week, for the second straight week, the rookie put up 100 total yards. He did it on 20 touches, including 5 receptions. This is great usage. You were able to pick him up, start him, and maybe he got you a big win to get into your fantasy playoffs. But very quietly in this game, Ty Johnson actually ran more routes, 2 more routes than Zonovan Knight, and it led to Johnson seeing 7 targets. That's great for a running back. And now I point that out because this week against the Bills, who have a bad run defense, bottom 10 in the NFL, but against the Bills, they're 10-point underdogs, basically, the Jets, which means you're probably going to see more checks downs to the running backs, and the main passing down back last week was Ty Johnson. So if the Jets get down, which Vegas is indeed suggesting, both running backs, like last week when they were trailing versus the Vikings, might see 5+ targets apiece. And this reminds me of the Jets week 1 game, albeit different running backs at that time with Breece Hall still healthy and different quarterbacks. This was a game where Michael Carter caught 7 balls as an underdog against the Ravens, and they were trailing, and Bryce Hall caught 6. And that's kind of how this offense is designed from San Francisco. You let the running backs get involved. And if this happens, I actually think Ty Johnson is worthy of starting in deeper leagues, and Zonovan Knight continue to start him, especially if the game stays close for a little while. Knight is probably going to see 15+ carries again. So although it seems scary as huge underdogs, they're involved in the passing game enough that I think both of these dudes are starters here for the Jets. But what about their division rival backfield in Miami with Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert? Well, to talk about this, we got to take it back to week 9. Because week 9 was when Jeff Wilson went from San Francisco to join Miami in a trade, and he ended up playing immediately more snaps than Raheem Mostert, 28 snaps to Mostert's 26. And then the following week, he is the clear running back 1, playing over 60% of the snaps, popping off for over 130 total yards, 25 fantasy points. He looked great out there. Then Mostert ends up getting injured, so in week 12, it's still Wilson as the main running back. He puts up 12 fantasy points, plays over 60% of the snaps. Now this past week, Raheem returns, but it's still going to be Jeff Wilson's backfield, right? Nope, it was Raheem Mostert who immediately plays 28 snaps to just 17 for Jeff Wilson. Wilson sees just 1 carry in this game. It's extremely confusing, and to make it even worse, they play on Sunday Night Football this week, so you have to make your decision earlier in the day for Miami, and they're going to face the Chargers. Now, this is a good sign because the Chargers rank 31st in run defense this season. They allow the 4th most points to the running back position, and it's a really good game environment for Miami. Here's what I mean. The Dolphins are basically tied for the 2nd highest team total on the slate. They have a 27.5, 28 in some spots team total. That's great news. And they're 3-point favorites, and all this is good news for Miami and these running backs, but which one of them do we start? Well, I have both backs projected for over 10 fantasy points, making them decent flex plays in most leagues, so whichever one you own, I would start, but if you had to pick one, I would choose Raheem Mostert. And now let's talk about another running back in this division. From the Jets to the Dolphins to the Bills, Devin Singletary. We want to start James Cook, but do we still want to start Singletary? He saw a season-low 48% of the snaps last week because that rookie Cook saw more usage, but he still saw a good game. Singletary went out there and put up 11 fantasy points. He still had 15 opportunities, found the end zone, was decent on a per-touch basis, but compared to James Cook, Cook had those 20 touches and puts up over 100 yards, was much more efficient. Of course, Cook is an issue here, but even more of an issue is that Singletary didn't lose work to just 1 running back, he lost it to 2. And that would be Nyheim Hines, who we're looking at his snap count right here. His 4 games since becoming a Bill, never topped 16% of the snaps. This past game, 26.5% of the snaps, and was schemed in on specific passing plays. Now, this crushes Singletary because he is actually the 3rd most talented and dynamic running back on this team. The former 3rd-round pick, look at his workout metrics. Anything above 70 is good. Anything above 50 is basically average. He's nowhere near average. He's well below average in everything, his burst, agility, and speed. And his production is just average. It's okay. He's 30th amongst 32 teams, 30th at the running back position in yards per carry, true yards per carry. But he does rank 7th in overall snaps this year, and that's just from a lack of competition. Earlier in the year, they didn't trust the veteran James Cook. They didn't have Nyheim Hines, but now Cook has developed and Hines is learning the playbook. So we're actually starting to see competition, and Singletary, the team is noticing, is probably the worst running back on this team, so I'd be sitting him here. And I'd also be taking Justin Herbert over a half a passing yard. Yeah, this is not a joke. This is real on prizepicks.com. They're doing a promotional prop until Sunday morning, so he is going to be projected for 290.5 passing yards. They're doing a prop. If he gets one, you win. Literally, if he gets one, you win. You could put, I believe, up to 25 bucks on this one and just win for free. Now, if you want to get that prop, use the code SAL22, SAL22, with the link in the description to prizepicks.com, and they'll give you a free bet up to $100. So if you put in 20, you get 20 right back. You put in 100, they give you 100 right back. And usually that alone is a great offer, but now you can put some of that onto this Justin Herbert prop and automatically win. So check it out with the link in the description below on PrizePicks. Use the code SAL22. So now let's go to the NFC and talk about Tony Pollard. Is he somebody that we have to worry about with Zeke being back and healthy? Because in the last game, Pollard saw just 42% of the snaps. I mean, his snaps dropped off a cliff from the 50s to the 80s when Zeke wasn't out there, just 42% last week. But this is a little bit skewed. Pollard still put up 24.5 fantasy points. He's now been a top 10 running back in 4 out of his last 5 games, and he only saw 42% of the snaps because it was a blowout in the 4th quarter, and he and Zeke got pulled. But now let's look more specifically at his usage with Zeke and without. So far this season, he's played 10 games with Zeke. He scores about 14 fantasy points, sees about 13 touches per game. All that solid usage. Without Zeke, though, is when he went nuclear. 28 fantasy points and 20 total touches per game when you factor in receptions. So simply put, you got to expect less overall touches, probably significantly less, dropping by 5 to 10 touches for Pollard per game with Zeke back, especially carries. Pollard is still extremely elite. He ranks second amongst every single running back in the NFL with 6.4 yards per touch. So even if he's only seeing 10 to 15 touches, he's still going to be flirting with these massive games. And oh yeah, this week the Cowboys face the Texans, who have the worst run defense in the NFL, but that's not all. The Cowboys also have the highest team total on the week at 31 points, 3 points more than any other team. They're projected to score 5 touchdowns here. And you might be saying 7 times 5. No, 6 times 5. You got to get that extra point. And Houston allows the most points to the running back position and the most yardage, 15 touchdowns in 12 games. But the most yardage, but look at this, the second most team allowing about 1,600 yards. The Texans over 1,700, 100 yards more than any other team. Simply put, you're going to be starting Tony Pollard this week. But are you starting the veteran Devonta Foreman, who's coming off the bye for the Carolina Panthers? And here's what he's done without Christian McCaffrey. He's played 6 games without McCaffrey, and he's averaged 14.2 fantasy points and over 19 total touches, 19 touches on the ground, and about a reception or so per game. So here's the key for Foreman. Similar to Dameon Pierce, the game has to stay close. In these games without McCaffrey, when the game is close, he averages 24.5 touches per game. But in the 2 games when they're getting blown out, 21-point loss to the Bengals, 10-point loss to Baltimore, he's only averaging 10 touches. And now this week, he's about a 4.5 point underdog to the Seahawks, or about an average run defense. They rank 15th overall. So if this is just 4.5, I mean, this is a close game. This is one of those games you can expect around those 20 touch numbers. And very quietly on the season, he has 24 red zone touches, which is just average on the entire season. But if you look at that, he's gotten all these over his last 5 games since he's become the starter here. So that is elite. Over the last 5 games, he ranks top 5 in red zone opportunities. In one game, he saw 11 alone. So given the fact that this is a close game and a fine matchup, and they just want to run the ball with Sam Darnold being their quarterback, I'm going to be starting Foreman, who I've projected for over 12 fantasy points this week. But are we starting the dudes in the Ravens backfield? Let's look at it. Gus Edwards and Kenyon Drake, and we can start with Edwards. This dude before week 13 saw a season high 50% of the snaps and was by far the main running back. Well, did that continue? It did not. This past week, he saw the same amount of snaps as Justice Hill and saw half as the amount of snaps as Kenyon Drake, the veteran running back. So out of nowhere, Gus Edwards just basically becomes relegated. And we know Edwards isn't much of a receiver. He literally has 0 receptions this season. So if he's not going to do anything in the receiving department, and now he's losing snaps in a 3-headed backfield with a mobile quarterback, either way, whether Lamar Jackson plays or not, it's Tyler Huntley, who's also a mobile quarterback. Yeah, this is a pretty ugly situation for Gus Edwards for sure, but what about Kenyon Drake? Well, at least Drake is involved seeing more snaps and more touches, and he's getting red zone usage, but even that's not reliable. And this matchup against a top 10 Steelers run defense in a tough divisional matchup is also not that great and not that awesome, especially if Lamar Jackson is out and they're not going to see as many red zone trips. Because of this, I'd be sitting every single one of these Ravens back this week. All right, now let's talk about an NFC running back in DeAndre Swift, who he might be back, folks, after seeing 51% of the snaps last week. This 51% of the snaps, as you can see the snaps numbers right here on the right-hand side, was the most out of any of the running backs on this team. He led the Lions running backs and his most since week 1. And reminder, in week 1, he put up over 170 total yards. He put up nearly 30 fantasy points. It was his best day on the year when he actually saw starter snaps and was healthy. Well, then this week, the only other time that he's seen over 50% of the snaps, he goes for over 20 fantasy points, 100 plus yards, 18 touches. All of it is fantastic. The takeaway here is that he's finally healthy and taking back his running back 1 role, and no better time than this game environment for week 14. You see the Lions. Yes, the Lions have the second highest team total on the week at 28 points. They're nearly 3-point favorites against the Vikings. Yeah, yeah, this is all real. This is how good this Lions team is when they're healthy. And Minnesota allows the 6th most receptions to the running back position. In these last 2 games alone, Swift has 14 targets. And he's also 3rd in yards per touch, averaging 6.4 yards per touch. So basically, this dude is dynamic with the ball in his hands, and now he's getting the ball in his hands more. This game environment is fantastic. We are starting Swift. But what do we do with the veteran Ezekiel Elliott, who has been solid, but can we trust him this week? As mentioned with his teammate Tony Pollard, they have a great matchup against the Texans where they're huge favorites and implied for the most points on the slate at 31 points. That's all good, but does it mean you're starting Zeke? But let's look at his recent games. In week 7, we knew he got hurt. In week 11, he was kind of limited, and it was a blowout against Minnesota, so they pulled him. He only plays 29% of the snaps. Then he finally sees some normal snaps, 52% in week 12 against the Giants. And this past week, he plays 55%, his most since getting injured. He puts up 18 fantasy points. He puts up a touchdown, 20 touches. All this looks good. And we know Dallas wants to run the ball. They're basically a run-first team. Now, before Zeke sat out with his injury, he was only averaging 4 yards per touch. Lately, the last 3 games, he's averaging 5 yards per touch. He looks much more bursty and healthy. He quietly has 15 plus fantasy points in 5 straight games. He's been fantastic. You're going to continue starting him here in the best game environment on the entire season for any single team. And if you'd like to see all the other players you should be starting this week, you can check it out in the fantasy cheat sheet down below where my rankings, projections, and a whole lot of other tools are. If you don't win your fantasy league, I'll refund the one-time payment of $10. It's as simple as that. So these are the running backs to start to improve your team. But if you want to see the players that you should be picking up off the waiver wires right now before the fantasy playoffs to improve your team, well then check out this lovely video right here. And be sure to get that Justin Herbert free prop on prizepicks.com.